panélistes et intervenants à ce débat. Bienvenue à vous tous ici aussi, le public, l'audience, au domaine de Pente où nous sommes désormais installés, le Club suisse de la presse. Et je salue également tous ceux qui nous suivent sur Zoom et tous ceux qui nous suivent également sur notre site internet où cette table ronde est, je vais d'ailleurs enlever mon masque comme ça. Voilà, où cette table ronde est diffusée en direct sur www.presseclub.ch. Vous pouvez la suivre en direct et elle sera toujours à disposition par la suite. Et voilà, je ne vais pas prolonger cette introduction. Je laisse Guy Mettan, le président de la Chambre des commerces, Chambre de commerce de l'Union des chambres de commerce Suisse-Russie, qui a pris l'initiative de cette table ronde, prendre la suite et la direction de la discussion. Cher Guy.
Merci. Merci à Pierre Rucci, mon successeur au Club suisse de la presse, grand directeur qui n'a pas la tâche facile avec le Covid pour animer le Club de la presse, puisque le Club de la presse, comme beaucoup d'entre vous savent, était jadis, enfin, l'année passée à la pastorale, déménagé ici. Et à peine installé le Covid, enfin la crise du Covid, et puis maintenant la faillite du château de Pente qui oblige à nouveau à tous réorganiser parce qu'il y avait un restaurant, il y avait du Wi-Fi, il y avait tout, et tout d'un coup, depuis un mois, plus rien. Donc, pas facile, mais enfin, on souhaite bonne suite. Et donc, merci aussi pour l'accueil, enfin l'organisation au Club suisse de la presse. Donc, I will speak in English because the webinar, the meeting, the roundtable will take place partly in English, partly in French. But maybe for our English speaking or the Russian speaking, but English speaking people and speakers, it's better to introduce in English. The idea was maybe a communication before. I have also to present Mr. Mikhail Shulgin, who is a counselor of the Russian Federation Embassy in Bern, and he will give us at the end of this roundtable a few words about the state of the economy in Russia as a concluding remark, because Ambassador Lukashev from the WTO have to apologize. He's apologizing because he is presently in a WTO meeting, and his secretary called me yesterday. He could not apply, but Mr. Shulgin will give us the greetings and the remarks of the Russian Federation authorities. So thank you, Mr. Shulgin, to be here from Bern now. So the idea of this roundtable was to examine the situation about the gas and energy project in Europe. So what are the stakes? What are the issues of this topic? With the participation of Mr. Laurent Horvath. He will be our first speaker, but through Zoom. With also Mr. Konstantin Simonov. He will also be on Zoom from Moscow. He just sent me an email saying he's in the traffic, but he's pretty at his office. So he will join in the coming minutes. And Ambassador Yves Rossier, former ambassador to Moscow and a fluent Russian speaker. In 4 years, you learned Russian. We will check it, Yves. Thanks to be here anyway. Et Monsieur Vincent Collignon, directeur des SIG, Director of the Service Industriel de Genève, who will speak from the part of the consumer, if I can say, from the buyer of gas. Okay, so I now wish to give the floor to Laurent Horvath by Zoom. He will give 7-minute speech. Every of them will give a speech of 7, and after we have questions. Tobias, on peut donner la parole à Laurent Horvath.
Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Très bien.
Magnifique. Thank you very much, Guy Mettan, for inviting me and for this challenge to give an overview of oil and gas in less than 7 minutes. Therefore, oil and gas. The oil industry forecast peak demand between 2026 and 2030. First, due to the electric cars and hydrogen, the energy efficiency and the climate change rules, and also the lack of investment in the oil and gas industry worldwide. If we look specifically on the private oil and gas companies such as Exxon, BP, Shell, Total, they have to make a transition into electricity and get out of the fossil fuel. Exxon and Chevron, it was 3 weeks ago, saw new board members brought by activists to move out of oil and gas. It will take years forever. But regarding for the oil and gas countries, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Qatar, I think they are more than happy to have to take over the market share and the private companies. However, there is something very important with the private companies is they have the technology, they have the innovation. Look at example, the fracking in the United States. Therefore, the question is, without technology and innovation from BP, Exxon, Shell, can Russia develop its new field in Arctica or in Siberia? And also the shale gas and this new non-traditional field. Now, if you look at the usage of oil and gas, oil is mainly used for the mobility, for plane, truck, boat, etc. Gas is more for the electricity production, heating, cooking, fertilizer for the agriculture, plastic. Therefore, for the mobility for gas is a very small business. And as you can see more and more electric cars, it will impact oil, but it will impact gas to produce more electricity. The big question is how much gas and oil has Russia in Arctica and Siberia? And it was very interesting because 3 weeks ago, it was a discussion within the Duma. And it was said that it was very important for Russia to sell as much oil and gas as soon as possible because the peak oil of Russia will happen between 2028 and 2035. A week after, the Russian energy minister mentioned that the Russian peak oil will be reached by 2080 and in 1 century for gas. Therefore, the right answer should be in these two dates. The problem with gas, there is only 10 countries that deliver most of the gas all over the world. It means few suppliers, many buyers. We call that a cartel. On the geopolitical side, this is a big mess. Europe needs gas from Russia. Germany needs gas to replace coal and nuclear to generate electricity. And now they received a yes for the Nord Stream 2. It was crucial to produce electricity to replace coal, but also for the industry. Russia is selling gas to China, and Russia needs Europe as a customer to balance the power of China. If you look at on the other side of the pond, the United States want to deliver liquid gas to make money first to Europe, and also to counterbalance the Russian energy dominance over Europe. Therefore, this is a fight between the big players, at least in Europe, which is China and the United States. And by the way, Russia is selling oil and uranium to the United States, and which is very interesting. The United States does not want Russia to sell gas to Europe. And the last thing is that China plans to be the world economic leader by 2049. Gas and environment. There is a major problem for gas, is the emission of methane during the extraction, during the transportation, and during the consumption. And methane is much more, I would say, impacting for the climate than CO2. Therefore, if you have to choose between coal and gas, you take oil. And today, many cities start to ban natural gas. It is way too dangerous for the planet. Therefore, after coal, it may be gas. If we look at the business model of gas, I have a friend here next to me. He just showed me the invoice of, he used gas to heat his house. He paid $20. On these $20, 10 goes to the company that deliver the gas by truck. 9 goes to the utility company that import the gas. 10 for the person who bring with the truck, 9 for the utility company, and 1 goes to the producer. Therefore, everybody is making money, but not the customer and the producer of gas. Therefore, the utility company generates huge profit with gas. And you understand why they are big fans, and Mr. Collignon will confirm it. Therefore, the utility company, at least in Europe, are stuck with gas and will push the consumption, even it's bad for the climate, because they have to balance the economics. Therefore, one of the questions is, should the income generated by the producer, such as Russia, should increase and not goes to, I would say, the third parties? For the conclusion, it is impossible to diminish at the same time the consumption of oil and gas because the renewables are not strong enough. It looks like gas may have the potential to replace oil and we may have enough gas for the next 20 or 30 years. However, there are 3 big issues for the gas industry. First of all is the pollution with the methane leaks. The second is the very small number of suppliers, only 10 countries. That bring to the third point, the geopolitics between China and United States, and what will be the role of Russia in this equation. Guy?
So thank you, Laurent, for this introducing words and for the statement. We will come back to you after hearing the other participant. Now, I wish to give the floor to Mr. Simonov, if he's with us.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so Mr. Simonov, welcome in Geneva. You are just following President Putin one week later, and we are happy to hear you. Thank you for accepting to be here with us. You are the president of the Russian National Fund for Energy Security, and you will speak about, you will give the point of view seen from Russia about energy and gas issue. So thank you again, and I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So for me, of course, it's a great pleasure to be with you today. It's a very warm day in Moscow. We have more than 30 degrees Celsius. So sorry for my maybe not so formal view. So if we are speaking about the role of Russia in European LNG balance, of course, we see the serious changing of the consumption of our energy commodities in European Union. And Laurent told about these stories. Of course, we see this climate agenda, and we see this energy transition. And of course, it's out of question that we will see the decline of our, first of all, coal export to European Union. It's a reality, and we are ready for this, because we will increase our export to Asia, first of all, to China, and then to India. So that is why, you know, this story is not so dangerous for Russia. If we are speaking about oil, it's a more complicated story, but, you know, the logic is approximately the same. We see, of course, and we will see the decline of consumption of oil in Europe, and it's out of question about this Green Deal and other climate ideas. And but, you know, it's interesting that, of course, we have the impact of pandemic and the decline of consumption last year. It's well-known facts, but you know, for Russia, so you are laughing, okay. So for Russia, you know, the problem was not only the level of consumption in Europe, because it's out of question that last year was a unique year and because of pandemic and so on. But the most interesting fact for us was the serious increasing of supply of oil from United States. So now, if we are speaking about oil situation, the main problem of Russia in Europe is not today is not Green Deal and electro vehicles or something like this. The main problem of Russia in Europe is United States. And it's an interesting story. We see the increasing of production of oil in United States, and we see the very serious increasing of export, even in 2020. Even in 2020, last year, United States increased their oil export and seriously increased oil export to European Union. And yes, it's a problem. It's a problem because you know, of course, energy transition. We'll see the impact of this story. Maybe not today, but today we see the impact of competition with United States. But also, the reaction is approximately the same as we're speaking about the coal story. We see serious, not too serious, but we see increasing during last 5 years. It's serious increasing, but during last year it was small increasing. You were speaking about physical amounts of export. We see the increase of our export to China, and also it's not only logical from we can say market situation, but also it's very logical from the situation with production in Russia, because we see the increase of production in eastern part of Russia. It's closer to China, and of course, and you know, we built pipelines, we built trunks from eastern Siberia to China, and also to Kozmino, to other Asian consumers. And you can see the serious change in the structure of our export. And last year, for example, at the end of last year, 40% of our export, it was light oil, and only 60% of our export was heavy oil. And you know, Urals is the heavy oil, sort of Russian oil, and usually we are exporting Urals for European Union. And why we have this increasing of light oil in our export? Because we are producing light oil in eastern part of Russia, in eastern Siberia, and we are increasing export of light oil to China. So that is why, you know, also it's a very simple reaction to energy transition in European Union. And the last point is the situation with gas. Laurent started this discussion, and he made very interesting points. But you know, first of all, it's very interesting that Laurent told us that there are very few supplies of gas in Europe, because you know, 10 years ago it was a very popular idea in Europe that diversification it will be the best answer to the future situation in gas market, and diversification will give serious plus for European Union, and it will be a real market, a lot of suppliers. Europe is one of the main consumers, and we'll see a competition battle between suppliers and decline of gas prices. And now it's very interesting that you are still speaking about very few suppliers. And also, you know, it was a very popular idea that Europe will build LNG terminals, and this LNG will come from all over the world, because LNG is flexible pipeline, and the era of pipes will be finishing very soon, and we will see spot market. There will be no long-term contracts, no pipes, no long-term contracts, only short-term market, spot market, and LNG as the main part of a European market, because LNG is, you know, a flexible resource. You can sell LNG in Europe, in Asia, and you have no need in pipes. It's a very simple reason. But you can see the situation in 2020 with gas. And for example, in May, you know, of course, it's absolutely different from last year. And when we see a huge increase of consumption, for example, you know, we see in May in Europe and Great Britain, the increase of consumption of gas was 30% higher than it was in 2020. So we see absolutely different situation with prices, absolutely different situation. So you know that, and it's not only about long-term contracts. You can see also the situation on European hubs. For example, you know, in May the average price on TTF was $335 per 1,000 cubic meters. It was six times higher than 1 year before in 2020. So we see that spot market is still very unpredictable market, and if prices are comfortable, of course, LNG suppliers are ready to sell gas to Europe. But for example, last year it was absolutely different situation and absolutely different story. And that is why when in 2019 we see the huge increase of LNG supply to Europe, last year the situation was not so optimistic for Europeans. So that is why, you know, we have these two models of future of European gas market. And still, of course, Europe is thinking that spot market will be dominating in nearest future. But you see, you can see, for example, the consumption of Russian gas this year. So so during the first quarter, the increase of consumption in Europe was also 30% of Russian gas. Of course, we know that the beginning of 2020 was very specific because of Ukraine story, because of situation with underground storage, because of weather. But now you had cold weather, and the situation is absolutely different. And you see that renewables is still a problematic, and Laurent told about this. Of course, it's a very interesting point about climate impact of natural gas, and it will be, in my opinion, very interesting discussion, because if you are anxious about methane leakage, so you need to support new pipes, for example, and it's still a question for Europe why you don't want to support Nord Stream 2 if you're anxious about the climate story. Because out of question that the amount of leakages from absolutely new pipe is much more less than the situation with Ukraine pipes, which was built, you know, at the beginning of 80s last year, so more than 40 years ago. That is why, you know, climate is an interesting story, and you know that in Russia we are ready. And we are preparing, we can say. We are not ready. We are not ready, but we are preparing for the carbon border adjustment mechanism implementation in Europe, so-called CBAM mechanism. And it's a very serious challenge for our oil industry, for our coal industry, for our chemistry, for our gas industry too. And of course, it will be a very serious discussion between Russia and Brussels about this carbon border adjustment mechanism. And one part of it will be the story about which gas is climately friendly, which gas is clear, and which gas is very bad from the environment point of view. And it will be interesting to compare, for example, our pipes with Norway pipes, or our pipes with the pipes from Algeria. And of course, distance is very high from fields in Yamal Peninsula to Europe, but you know, it's a new pipeline system. From Bolonenko field, for example, we built absolutely new pipes. Bolonenko, Ukhta, the coast of Baltic Sea, then Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2. It's 4 new pipes. And we can compare our climate impact with United States LNG, for example. It was a very interesting point of a new Minister of Energy in the United States, which told several weeks ago that Russian gas through Nord Stream 2 will be the most dangerous gas and the most dirty gas if we're speaking about climate impact. But we need to have honest, we can say, honest audit of these stories, because we have absolutely different calculations. And it will be also the very important question if we're speaking about the CBAM mechanism, the honest calculations and the honest system of audit. So I want to stop here, and maybe it's better to answer to your questions.
So thank you, Konstantin. Thank you very much for these insights. Quite interesting. Now I would give the floor to former Ambassador Yves Rossier, who is now working for some Russian business companies and who knows, I can give you mine, know the Russian economy and the Russia in general. So Yves, please.
Thank you, Guy. I will perhaps start with three things. First, we should concentrate on Europe because we are talking about Europe. I tried to check, preparing this meeting, what are the expectations on demand over the next decades as far as gas is concerned. I read many experts' papers. It goes from 0 to plus 40%. So it's very difficult to guess. One of them will be right, and we'll see in 2040. But one thing is sure, nobody expects the demand to go lower for three reasons. The first is that Europe's production is sinking. Groningen gas field will close in 2022. So the Norwegian production will decrease. Even North African production will decrease by 30%. And this, whilst the national demand will probably increase. And the second factor is, of course, the closing of coal-fired plant and the exit of nuclear energy. So even if there is not an increase in demand, in global demand, there is clearly a necessity for replacement until the renewable energies are capable of going beyond their level of about 15% today. Just to remind you, it's about the energy consumptions in Europe, it's about 15% renewable, 13% nuclear, 15% coal, 35% oil, and 22% gas. Of this 22% gas, a third comes from Russia, which makes the so-called dependency on Russia at about 8% for Europe. So as you see, it's rather moderate. On the other way, the dependency of Russia from Europe is much greater, especially if you build a pipeline. The pipeline binds customer and seller much more than when you send a LNG ship. Second, the projection, what the EU decided, so the reduction of emissions and the increase of the part of renewables, both by 30–35% in 2030 and much more in 2050. It's this ambitious goal of 100%. So in this time between, if coal is phased out, if the nuclear power, as in some countries, is phased out too, it leaves us only gas. Now, there is not gas, there is gas and gas. Not every gas has the same impact on the environment. Not every gas bears the same price. The EU has done a huge job. First, infrastructure. The market is now almost integrated. The Iberic Peninsula less. It still depends on LNG terminals, but the building works are going on. So soon you will be able to buy your gas from whoever you want at the price that will be decided by the market. Why do I say the market? Because the long-term contract, take or pay, are being slowly replaced by spot markets. Of course, it's not yet the case today, not in majority, but this is the trend that's going on. So it's a good trend for the consumers. It's a good trend for the price. environmental aspect of gas production and transport to customers. LNG, of course, is much more makes much more emissions due to fracking, and then due to the transport by boat. It can be between 2 and 4 times more emissions, depending, of course, on the distance where this gas, where this LNG comes from. Second, the pipelines like Nord Stream 1 or Nord Stream 2 needs much less compressor. You know, to carry the gas through a pipeline, you need a compressor. If the pipeline is onshore, you need a compressor every 30 kilometers. These compressors, they use gas as well. So whereas the underwater pipeline is just one big compressor at the start, and that's enough to carry it to the point. So if we leave the politics aside, which is of course very difficult because it's a highly political subject, of course the natural transition energy is gas, is natural gas transported by pipeline to Europe. The needs, we are talking about 350 billion cubic meters per year. The capacity of the pipelines is not enough. You have about 60, 65 in Nord Stream 1, about the same in Nord Stream 2 when it will be completed, about 30 with TANAP, about 33 through Belarus with the Yamal pipeline, and through Ukraine about 70, 80 with Urunguy and the Trans-Balkan pipeline. So you see, even the existing pipelines, even including Nord Stream 2, are not sufficient to cover the needs. So LNG will definitely be needed as well. To which price we will see. If the market is functioning, there will of course be a preference to gas being carried by pipes, but as I said, it will probably not be enough to satisfy the demand over the next 20 years. It's interesting to see that now the LNG capacities, the capacity of the LNG terminals in Europe is only 25%, so it's underused. It's extremely underused. They could deal with 3 times more LNG than they actually do now. One of the reasons is the price, probably, and this lowering in demand due to COVID. But as I said, the infrastructure for a functioning market is in place or will soon be in place. We'll probably go back to politics later, and I would leave it that aside for the time being. But just one remark: if we manage to go to 100% renewable energy by 2050, according to the EU strategy, we should not forget that this means as well another dependence, because about 50% of the products of the special metals and earth that are needed to build batteries, wind power plants, and so on, are today at least produced by China. So we should be careful when we talked about dependence. When there is a buyer and the seller, there is always a dependence. And you can choose your buyer, you can choose your seller, but there is always a dependence, and the dependence is always reciprocal. So I think that's enough for now. I'll keep the rest for the discussion. Thank you, Guy.
Thank you, Yves. Very interesting also remarks. Maintenant, on va revenir au français, la langue française, puisqu'on est bilingue ou trilingue. On n'a pas d'intervenant qui va parler russe, mais enfin voilà, puisqu'on a une chambre de commerce bilatérale. Et je vais passer maintenant la parole à monsieur Vincent Collignon, donc directeur au SIG, notamment responsable de l'approvisionnement en gaz, et puis qui est aussi administrateur de notre société suisse Gaznat, gaz naturel, donc il connaît bien ce marché du gaz. Et l'idée, c'était que, comme les SIG ici à Genève sont des acheteurs de gaz, qui donnent un petit peu la perspective vue du côté de l'acheteur et du consommateur. Merci encore d'avoir accepté. Je sais que vous étiez très pris aujourd'hui, mais vous êtes venu ici. Donc, merci encore, Vincent, pour être là.
Alors, merci Guy. Merci aussi pour l'invitation. C'est un honneur de venir parler à votre conférence. Moi qui ai toujours pensé en citoyen européen que l'Europe était que territoriale et qu'elle est, comme je vous le disais, de l'Atlantique à l'Oural. Donc, ça me fait très plaisir d'assister à cette conférence. Loin des problématiques géopolitiques qui ont été signalées par les intervenants précédents, je vais essayer de revenir un peu plus du côté terre à terre et du côté des clients, parce que finalement, tout ce gaz-là, il finit par être consommé par des clients. Et je crois qu'une erreur serait de parler que de production, de transport, et d'oublier et de faire abstraction de la demande, qui est avant tout évidemment la source de l'énergie. Alors pour moi, l'énergie, l'environnement, le climat, tout ça c'est un seul sujet. On a mis longtemps avant de mettre tout ça sur la table sur un même sujet. Longtemps, il y a eu l'environnement, le climat et puis l'énergie. Et on s'aperçoit aujourd'hui que tout ça, c'est un sujet qui ne fait qu'un et qui va nous amener aux décisions qui vont vers le futur. Aujourd'hui, l'enjeu, c'est la transition énergétique. L'enjeu, c'est de passer à des énergies renouvelables. Alors, le gaz est évidemment un combustible qui n'a rien à voir avec le pétrole liquide ou le charbon. Néanmoins, ça reste un élément fossile que l'on met beaucoup plus vite à brûler qu'à se constituer. Donc, en cela, il va nous aider à réaliser la transition énergétique, mais ce ne sera peut-être pas l'élément énergétique du futur. Alors, les décisions géopolitiques, les décisions politiques sont toujours faciles à prendre. Et ce qu'on oublie beaucoup, j'en profite aussi pour parler un peu de la politique énergétique suisse, on oublie souvent la garantie de l'approvisionnement. La garantie de l'approvisionnement, tant qu'il n'y a pas de shutdown, tant qu'il n'y aura pas une pénurie à un moment donné, personne ne s'en rend compte et c'est affaire de spécialistes. Aujourd'hui, on ne peut pas penser à l'approvisionnement du futur, on ne peut pas penser à fournir nos clients si on ne pense pas avec une vue un peu plus grande sur une garantie d'approvisionnement, toute énergie confondue. On voit bien, et Laurent en a parlé tout à l'heure, des décisions politiques qui ont arrêté le nucléaire, qui était une force énergétique sur laquelle l'Europe s'était fondée, provoque tout un tas de cataclysmes, parce que derrière, il y a toujours des utilisateurs, des consommateurs, et qu'il faut toujours fournir. Et si aujourd'hui on en est à ces grandes discussions géopolitiques, c'est bien parce qu'on a pris des fois des décisions qu'il fallait prendre, hein, mais très rapidement, et maintenant on en gère un petit peu les conséquences. Alors là, aujourd'hui, je vais vous parler un petit peu de Genève, parce que garantir l'approvisionnement, c'est une chose, mais encore faut-il concilier l'acceptation des consommateurs avec les énergies qu'on consomme. Alors aujourd'hui, Genève, c'est 8% de la consommation totale de gaz en Suisse. En Suisse, ça représente à peu près 35 TWh. Sur ces 35 TWh, il y en a à peu près 8% sur la consommation genevoise. La consommation genevoise, c'est deux grands chapitres, hein, Laurent l'a reprécisé. C'est l'industrie, pour un tiers à peu près, et puis c'est le chauffage pour les 2 tiers. Donc, sur 2030, on pense que on consomme à Genève 3 TWh à peu près, et on estime qu'avec la transition énergétique, on va arriver en 2030 à consommer 2 TWh. Donc on va diminuer à peu près d'un tiers. On va diminuer d'un tiers, donc sur le logement, sur l'immobilier, le logement, le chauffage, en fait, tout simplement. Il va y avoir 3 éléments qui vont jouer. D'abord, le réchauffement climatique, on a besoin de moins en moins de chaleur. Deuxièmement, l'isolation des bâtiments, puisque le canton de Genève veut lancer une grande campagne sur l'isolation des bâtiments. Et ensuite, bien évidemment, la transition énergétique, puisque nous investissons notamment au service industriel sur des chauffages à distance, et on pense transférer l'énergie gaz en énergie de chauffage à base d'énergie renouvelable, comme la chaleur récupérée des steppes d'épuration, des stations d'épuration, ou encore de la géothermie ou l'incinération que vous connaissez des chenilles. Sur l'industrie, il y aura deux éléments majeurs qui feront diminuer les consommations de gaz. Premièrement, c'est l'efficience énergétique, puisque les entreprises travaillent sur leur efficience, et puis c'est aussi sur l'électrification. Dernière chose qui concerne les consommateurs, c'est que les consommateurs sont de plus en plus sensibles aux origines gazières et puis au système d'extraction du gaz. Donc c'est l'ASIG, donc il y a l'association marketing des gaziers en Suisse, a donné un objectif de 30% de biogaz dans son réseau en 2030. Donc ça vous laisse un petit peu... Aujourd'hui, il n'y en a que quelques pourcents, hein, donc ça vous montre un petit peu l'objectif ambitieux de la branche gazière en Suisse. Et puis, voilà, c'est dans cette transition de biogaz que souhaitent avoir les consommateurs. Les consommateurs sont de plus en plus sensibles, je vous ai dit, à l'extraction, au type d'extraction. Donc, si on reparle de géopolitique, je sais qu'à Genève, nos consommateurs, nos clients ne sont pas très friands de gaz de schiste, par exemple, et puis également de l'origine du pays. Voilà moi un peu ce que je peux vous dire. Et je pense que ces attentes du consommateur, il ne faut pas les négliger, parce que on l'a vu, on regardait ce qui s'est passé en France les dernières années, où c'est la population qui a fait arrêter les autorisations d'exploration gazière. Donc la force de l'opinion publique n'est pas à négliger. Voilà ce que je pouvais dire en quelques mots, Monsieur le Président.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup pour vos précisions là, concernant effectivement l'évolution du marché vu du côté des consommateurs. Now maybe I would like to come back to our to Mr. Horvath and Mr. Simonov. Maybe do you have some comments or some reactions to what has been said just now? And yes, as we have received here last week, President Biden and Putin, so we have also seen the geopolitics is very important. What are you expecting from this summit? You said that United States was a key factor in European energy market. So what are your conclusions? So maybe Laurent Horvath and Konstantin. So Laurent, I give you the floor.
Yes, there are two things that are important. First of all, nobody has a crystal ball to see what will be the future. Therefore, and there is a wonderful example. If you asked me 2 months ago what will be the decision or the future of Nord Stream 2, it will be, I was in one direction, and maybe 2 or 3 weeks after, Mr. Putin and Mr. Biden discussed, okay, this problem is solved. Therefore, things can evolve extremely rapidly based on the interest of the countries. Therefore, and to me, what is extremely, I would say, crucial is to see what will be the decision of United States between United States and China. And I know that Europe is in the middle of this fight. I'm not sure they are able to react, but I think it would be wise for Europe to get a little bit closer than Russia, because they have the energy and we need the energy. And many people think that the goal of Europe is 2050 to get out of fossil fuel. I have no idea if it's possible to do it. Based on the renewable and how much energy the citizens need and what we need to, therefore, no idea. And as I mentioned, in 1 month, the situation with Nord Stream 2 just went to the other side, and things can move extremely quickly.
Thank you. Konstantin, Mr. Simonov.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I want to have several remarks. First of all, of course, I absolutely agree with Laurent about the future, because in my opinion, a lot of people now in Europe, they're speaking about energy future of Europe in 2050. And for me, it's a surprise, because they know everything. Because, you know, we don't know what will be oil price 1 month later, but everybody can speak you what will be energy balance 30 years later. It's a very strange story. And when I have this climate, for example, discussions with European, or discussion about energy balance and energy transition, you know, it's like situation in Soviet Union 40 years ago, because absolutely was sure that we will build communism until 2000. And now it's 2020, no communism, no Soviet Union. But, you know, in 1980, everybody in our country was absolutely sure that we know very well the future. And the future was very, very upset for us. So that is why future is a very dangerous story, and we must not forget about it. Because blue sky sinking is an excellent story, but sometimes, you know, the weather can be not so great. So, for example, about gas, it's an excellent idea that it will be a spot market, as I said, competition. Mr. Ambassador told about it. There will be no long-term contracts, and it will be a huge battle between consumers for European market. And, you know, in 2090, for example, I see the serious increase of LNG supply, and European experts were speaking about this comfortable situation, and this situation will be more comfortable and comfortable. Now you can see, for example, I told you the price in May. You can see the price on TTF yesterday. Yesterday, what was the price on gas on TTF? It was $363 per 1,000 cubic meters. It's the highest price from the beginning of March 2018. So during last 3 years, you see the highest price now in Europe. Yes, you can speak about weather, hot weather in Europe, and so on, so. But now this market is still, you know, it's a competition. You can buy LNG, but you can see the prices in Asia, and you can see that all LNG now is going to Asia. And you can see the situation with LNG in Europe. For example, you can see the amount of supply of LNG now. In May, for example, the amount of supply of LNG in Europe and in United Kingdom, it was by 70% less than in May 2020. This June, the supply of LNG is approximately 14% less than in April this year. So you see the market reality. If LNG supply can sell this gas on more expensive price in Tokyo or in China, of course he will do it. And you can see the impact of this today. As I said, see today and yesterday prices on gas in Europe. And so also you can see the amount of LNG in Europe. And Ambassador told about this, that Europe during last several years built huge amount of LNG terminals. And you can see the majority of them, they're still empty this year. And because infrastructure is not enough. You invest huge money for infrastructure, but it's not enough. It's not enough. And we are not against market competition. We are ready for this market competition, but it must be market competition, because we're speaking about Nord Stream 2. It's very far from market story. And also, because there was an interesting question about synthetic gas. Also, it's still a question about honest implementation of climate agenda, and honest, as I said, implementation of this CBAM rules. If we're speaking about trade relations between Russia and European Union. So if you want to have market competition, okay, we are ready for this, because, you know, Russia can sell you gas for the most cheap prices if you compare with Azeri gas, United States, LNG. We are ready for this battle. We are ready for this battle. Please give us the chance for this market competition. And also we have very serious argument, the stability of supply. And this winter, this spring, this summer, in my opinion, is a very excellent example that stability of supply is also a commodity, and you can't forget about it, because as I said, LNG is a flexible market, but if the LNG supply can sell it more expensive, he will do it, and he will forget about you as a market. So it's still a problem. And the last point is about geopolitics, because Mr. Chairman asked this question. Of course, our relations with United States, they're very upset and very bad. And also, we are not, we are not proud of this battle with European Union, because Europe, is Europe is still our main market. And it's, for example, you are speaking about gas. We are selling now approximately. Last year, we sold a little bit more than 4 BCM, if you're speaking about pipeline gas to China. It's peanuts, of course, if you compare with European market. Europe is still our main market. And we want to, as I said, we want to struggle for this market. We want to have this opportunity to have market situation. And that is why, of course, politics is very upset for us. And we see the situation with Nord Stream 2. We see, and during a long period of time, European Union accused Russia in politicization of energy policy. But now we see absolutely different story. We see the politicization of energy from European point of view. And you don't want to listen of our arguments when we, for example, give you the figures why we are building, for example, Nord Stream 2, if we're speaking about the price of delivery. Because, the distance from Bavanenko field to Greifswald in Germany is 1,900 kilometers shorter than the distance from Urengoy through Ukraine to Germany. It's a serious argument. It's an opportunity to decrease our transportation costs and to give you more cheap gas. But you don't want to give us this opportunity, and it's a very pity story. And that is why, of course, this meeting is just the first maybe step. But in my opinion, in Washington, they understood that the main problem of United States and the main problem of European Union is not Russia. The main problem is China. It's out of question. And if you want to press Russia more closer to China, if you want to see Russia as the main energy supply to China, if you want to see Russia as the raw material supply and the colony of China, okay, you can continue this policy of sanctions. You can continue the policy of serious pressure on Russia, and you will see more strong China in several years. And then you will solve the problem of China, but it will be absolutely different story. It will be absolutely different China with the help of Russian resources and with the help of Russian reserves. So that is why, in my opinion, this is the main argument for United States. Maybe it's not a reload of our relation, of course, because they're in ruin now. It was a huge collapse during the last 7 years. We are 7 years under sanctions. It's a huge term. But we see the first step, and for us, it's a very important point because, because in Moscow there was a very, very nervous expectations about Biden as the policy of Democratic Party, because they will continue the political pressure and so on, so on. So now we see the first steps also from the Democratic administration, and it's important for us. And in my opinion, the main reason for United States is that they understood that Russia is the key to solve the problem of China. It's out of question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Simonov. I let Mr. Rossier, and I have a question for Mr. Collignon. We have one question from the floor and one by Zoom. It's already 1:30. So I give you the floor, Yves and Vincent. And, yeah.
Thank you. One word to the comments of Mr. Horvath and Mr. Simonov. When Mr. Horvath said it would be wise to get a little bit closer to Russia for Western Europe or for the EU, he's absolutely right. But for that, steps have to be done by both sides. I hear Mr. Simonov's argument, keep on dealing with us this way and we'll jump in the arms of China. This is not a reasonable attitude. It's a teenager attitude. Because first, if Russia is integrated into China's influence, it's a very disbalanced relationship in spite of the nuclear warheads. Second, if a relation is sour, both are responsible. And in the past, there were mistakes, but there were mistakes on both sides. The Europeans, Europe did big mistakes, it's true, but Russia did some mistakes as well, Mr. Simonov. And a little bit self-criticism on both sides would probably help us, because remember, if the EU and Russia are binding together, we are both stronger than the Americans and stronger than the Chinese. And if we think of the common values we have, it could be a pleasant perspective. About using the gas for political purposes, yes, Nord Stream 2 is a good example of it. But I have to remind as well that in the past years, even under the Soviet Union was always a very reliable supplier of energy to Western Europe, even in the worst times of the Cold War. But Russia made a difference after the 90s between the Eastern European countries and the Western European countries. So the perception of Russia as a reliable supplier is good in France, in Germany, in Italy, or wherever. It's completely different in Ukraine, Poland, or in the Baltic states. Ask yourself why. I know the story is complicated and we will not dwell into it, but yes, I would wish politics to be out of it, but whether we like it or not, energy is a highly political subject. Predictions, Mr. Simonov is right, predictions are always wrong. But decisions, political decisions have impact, have influence and consequences. Not always the one we expect, but they have. And the decision to increase the proportion of renewables, the exit of coal, the phasing out of coal, the phasing out of nuclear energy, all these are decisions, not predictions, and they will have consequences. And lastly, remember hydrogen. Hydrogen would be the cleanest fuel. I mean, I know it's a fata morgana. It's like the horizon. It moves away. The further you go, the further it goes. There are two ways to make it: by electrolysis or using natural gas, by methane pyrolysis, which is much more efficient and has much less emissions. Before that, you need natural gas and you need pipeline. So again, there you have a bet on the future. So that's all I wanted to
Okay, merci.
say. Thank you.
Thank you for heating up our debate with Mr. Simonov, but he looks, I will give you the floor, but maybe to Vincent Collignon, je voulais lui demander quelle est la structure de l'approvisionnement de gaz en Suisse. Et puis après, on passera aux questions du public. Et puis, voilà. Donc, on peut se donner un quart d'heure de plus avant que M. Shulgin, pour terminer vers 13h, n'est pas si pressé. Alors, M. Collignon, sur la position.
Alors, le marché du gaz en Suisse n'est pas complètement liquide et pas complètement abouti. Si vous avez suivi un petit peu ce qui se passe dans la presse, aujourd'hui, le marché n'est pas similaire à ceux des autres pays européens. Alors, comment ça marche aujourd'hui? C'est très simple. Le gaz, il arrive par le tuyau Suisse Gaz, et puis ensuite, il est réparti dans 4 réseaux régionaux. Et pour ce qui est de la Romandie, donc, il passe par le réseau Gaznat, qui fait pour Genève et pour tous les actionnaires de Gaznat, à la fois qui assume le transport et à la fois qui assume l'approvisionnement. Donc aujourd'hui, tout notre gaz est vendu, nous est vendu par notre entreprise Gaznat. Dans cet approvisionnement, il y a 2 types de contrats. Il y a des contrats à long terme, qui sont des contrats plutôt historiques. Toujours pareil, avec comme je vous le disais tout à l'heure, avec une préoccupation de garantie d'approvisionnement, puisqu'il n'y a que des contrats long terme qui peuvent vous garantir un approvisionnement. Par contre, derrière un contrat long terme, généralement, on maîtrise moins les prix. Donc, du coup, le portefeuille est fait aussi d'un autre volume, qui est le volume spot ou le volume court terme. Voilà, donc aujourd'hui, les fournisseurs, c'est tous les fournisseurs de la place, tous les producteurs, la dizaine de producteurs que vous connaissez. Et puis, comme je vous le disais tout à l'heure, ce qui est l'attente des consommateurs, c'est de savoir comment le gaz est extrait et d'où il vient. Donc, on travaille aujourd'hui sur un approvisionnement qui va certifier à nos clients la garantie d'origine, d'une part, donc le pays, et puis d'autre part, le mode d'extraction. Voilà. Alors aujourd'hui, ce qu'on peut vous donner aujourd'hui, c'est les noms des compagnies qui vendent. Par contre, d'où est extrait le gaz, il n'y a pas de système de traçabilité. Et donc aujourd'hui, on peut se retrouver. Oui. Alors après, on peut regarder ce qui rentre ça on le sait. Voilà, mais ce qui sort chez le consommateur, ça, tant qu'il n'y a pas de traçabilité, on ne peut pas vraiment le définir. Donc, il faut effectivement regarder ce qui rentre dans les tuyaux. Et puis ensuite, si on reparle des tuyaux, tout approvisionneur, plus il a de choix de provenance, et évidemment, plus il peut jouer sur les prix. Donc, voilà. Donc, plus il y a de gazoducs, et plus ce sera fluide et que le consommateur restera gagnant. Voilà.
Merci. Oui, tu avais one question from the floor. Yes, please. Maybe give your name.
Alexis Trunlin, Hyposwiss Private Bank. I'd like to return to climate influence. During a lot of numbers of climate conference, producer of energy receive huge demands to decrease producing, etc., but nobody pay attention how many electricity use the production of cryptocurrency, of mining of Bitcoin. For example, just in one province, Sichuan in China, it's using more electricity than produce ISG totally. It's, in my view, we blame, we have a lot of political party, green, etc., blame our air companies that it's need to cut off the CO footprints, but we have huge, for example, just producing of mining electricity, it's more than all consumption of Argentina or Netherlands. What's your opinion to this problem, and how it's possible to attract attention to this problem? Because it's, in my view, it's just waste and huge influence, bad influence for our climate. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Maybe we take the second question from the room with the microphone. Yes. And after I will ask Laurent and Mr. Simonov to answer. Yeah.
It's okay. Hello.
Yes.
In fact, it's not a question. It's only I want to comment, if it's possible. I want to comment something related to this. Okay, my name is Galvez, Jose Galvez. I'm living in Geneva, but I study in Russia, the best year of the Soviet Union. I had 2 children that were born there, and now I'm here. And I had the opportunity to work for, just to tell you, in a technology transfer section at CERN, just to show how these things works here in Europe. So the innovation of CERN, as you can imagine, is so large. There is a lot of inventions, but the section at CERN, with a lot of people who knows physics, who knows administration, who knows everything, they don't know how to manage inventions, innovations, comparing, for instance, with the United States. For instance, in Stanford University, they have a section of technology transfer. So they have in royalties $800 million per year. And here at CERN, we have only 60,000 francs per year. So we are not going fast comparing to the United States. So something, or there is a problem here in Europe that we are not able to manage. So I use this opportunity here in this meeting of the Chambre de Commerce, no? La Russie y la Swiss. So to show you that there is we can use these synergies, because in Russia, they have a lot of experience in a new, saying, technology of nuclear physics based on the use of lead for cooling the reactors that they use in submarines. And here in Geneva, we have also a big experience in producing accelerators at CERN. So 20 years before, a Nobel Prize of Physics, Carlo Rubbia, he had showed to the world that it is possible to make a new kind of reactor physics using accelerators and using the technology which is demonstrated also in Russia. So we are discussing now about the energy resource that we have. We are really lucky to have these energy resources like fossil energy and renewable energies we are using, but this has the end very soon. For the guys, it's 50 years, and for other fossil use energies also, we have a big energy consumption that is increasing every year, and we have to solve the problem. So I propose you, as other utility companies in Geneva, as we told, that have 300 million of dollars of profit, are here using in this utilities business. So yeah, I finish in 1 minute, sorry. And so okay. I want you to propose to invest from the benefits of utilities of this kind of business you are doing on these new technologies. Try to use these synergies that sound from Russia and this new technology, right. And go. We should go fast to other countries, like for instance, United States.
Okay. Thank you for the proposal. Yes, we will notice it. So no question from Boris, Tobias? No. Because yes, no. Last question, and after we have to conclude, yeah, to answer and conclude, yeah.
Yes, hello, my name is Lucy Morgan-Edwards. I'm an independent researcher. I was interested in what Monsieur Rossier said about the metals that are required to implement the new Green Deal. And given that there is so much political momentum behind this, and I've done 2 degrees in environmental studies, and personally I see the new Green Deal as being a purely political situation, you know, that it seems to be pushed by indoctrination of children, by censorship of scientific debate, and it seems that there's an objective of central banks. But, you know, it also seems to me that given what happened in Texas this year, it's a very dangerous political situation. And do you see that it might ultimately fail? I mean, how are you going to counteract the new Green Deal in future? Because of obviously our energy requirements are going to continue to grow.
Thank you for the question. Not easy to answer. Il faut qu'on... Okay. No, because we have Mr. Shulgin also, he has to give some words. Okay, so maybe as it is already, yes, 1:45, and we have also the speech of Mr. Shulgin, I would ask Konstantin and Laurent to answer, and maybe after Yves for Madame. Konstantin, maybe you could answer the first remark about the climate and mining of cryptocurrencies and energy consumption.
Okay, thank you for this question. But you know, for example, Elon Musk, you know, at the beginning of this year told to us that for him it was a huge surprise that crypto is producing from coal electricity, and for him it was a serious shock. And I was laughing for his knowledge about this. But you know, crypto is an excellent example that, of course, new economy is still consuming energy, still consuming electricity, and this electricity is, of course, from coal, from oil, and from gas, and in China, of course. So that is why, you know, in my opinion, crypto is China government can solve the problem of cryptocurrency, but in my opinion, the problem is more serious. If you want really to struggle with climate change, you need to stop. You need to decrease the level of production of commodities, and you need to decrease the consumption of commodities in the world. So that is why it's a very simple story, but you need to solve this problem. What you will do without economic growth, And how you will solve the problem of poverty in the world without economic growth? Because if you want really to struggle with climate change, you need not to struggle with fossil fuel. First of all, you need to struggle with consumption. And cryptocurrency is an excellent example that you're using more and more electricity for a very strange things. And that is why we need to solve this, in my opinion, very serious problem. So how to decrease the level of consumption in the world, and on the same time to solve the problems on poverty. And in my opinion, it's a serious story. And for example, about metals and raw materials in energy transition, it's an excellent story, because we are returning to the question of this blue sky thinking in Europe when we are speaking about energy transition, because nobody wants, only this year you began to think about that you need cuprum, nickel, and other raw materials to produce solar stations, to produce wind stations. Also, another question is about utilization of solar and wind energy stations. Nobody wants to solve these problems. Nobody wants to speak about it. It's wishful thinking. The same story with hydrogen. Now everybody in Europe is speaking about hydrogen. No solutions to the problem of logistics. You need to build new pipes, because it's impossible to use gas pipelines to transit hydrogen. Impossible from technical point of view. So you need to build, you need to invest huge amount of money to hydrogen pipes. Green hydrogen is still very expensive, but everybody in Europe is speaking about hydrogen as 100% future, and nobody wants to listen to the arguments against this story, and they're still very serious about economy, about logistics, about safety of hydrogen, and so on, so on, so on. Because Soviet Union already built a hydrogen air plant 50 years ago. So it's not a new technology. It's not a new technology, but still a problematic technology. And the last point is my question to Ms. Ambassador Rossier. Please, Ms. Ambassador, give me even one example of using of, for example, gas in political pressure of Russia, for example, to Baltic states, because we have very problematic relations with them. And you told that Soviet Union in Russia was a reliable supplier to Western Europe and not reliable supplier to Eastern Europe. For example, Baltic states, seriously problems. We have serious problems, political problems with them. Give me one example of using energy as an instrument of political pressure to Baltic states. And for me, it will be very interesting to listen to this example.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Simonov. Maybe Laurent, just a few words, and after we will close the roundtable. Laurent?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, for me, we are in a transition between oil to electricity. And who is the biggest player in electricity at the moment? One of the biggest players they are the GAFAM, Google, Amazon, etc. And because they use a lot of computer mining for Bitcoin, but also they are going into the drone taxi, or they are doing in the car, electric cars. So it's interesting to see how it moves. Regarding the innovation, the financement of innovation, I take as example for Switzerland, if you take the startups, the good ideas in energy are sold to the US or to China. Why? Because Switzerland does not give money, or the investors or the government does not. And you can perfectly see that with the hydrogen. The Swiss conversion does not support hydrogen, which may be the future. And the last things with the nuclear and all of this science fiction, there are no magic stick. And most of the technology are ready today, but there are no magic stick. Don't bet on the future or something that does not exist, that will not exist in a century from now. We need to do what we have in our hands.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I wish to thank all our speakers for their contribution. I think it was quite interesting. So thank you again, Mr. Simonov. We wish... Oh, no, après. No, otherwise. maybe, no, I stop.
Well, sorry, Mr. Simonov. I was about to answer you, but I got prohibition from Mr.
Yes, yes, it's an authoritarian government here. Yes, no, sorry. So thank you again for the exchanges, and wish you all the best. And before to conclude, I wish to give the floor to Mr. Shulgin. He will give some words because we asked him to speak about give some words about the state of the economy now in Russia.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, Votre Excellence, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, Mesdames et Messieurs, chers collègues.
Sorry.
Ça marche? Voilà, donc merci beaucoup pour nous avoir invités à notre ambassade à prendre part dans cet événement. Nous sommes vraiment toujours très ravis de débattre ces sujets-là, et cette année a vraiment été très très difficile pour tout le monde, et maintenant la vie pas à pas revient à la normalité. Vous avez mentionné lors de votre débat que vous planifiez d'organiser au mois de novembre une délégation en Russie. Soyez assuré, Monsieur Metton, que notre ambassade, de notre côté, fera tout le nécessaire pour vous aider en question logistique pour cet événement. Maintenant, je vais passer en anglais pour vous dire quelques mots sur les relations russo-suisses économiques. I will try to be short. Despite the epidemiological situation and the difficult political background, our Russian-Swiss economic relations, they remain stable. The landmark event, of course, on the economic field in the beginning of the year in 2021 was the participation of the President Vladimir Putin in the Davos agenda organized by the World Economic Forum on January 27. We continue to have our economic cooperation developing through our economic ministries. On December 2nd, 2020, we had another Swiss-Russian financial dialogue with the participation of the deputy ministers of finance. On December 15, also through video conference, we have the discussion between the two co-chairmen of the Joint Intergovernmental Commission on Trade and Economic Cooperation between Mr. Siluanov and Mr. Bollinger. We hope that the next session will take place in Bern on November 19th. Speaking of bilateral and trade economic cooperation, I would like to note that recently it has developed against a rather unstable situation in the world economy. Of course, the coronavirus also played a negative impact. All those factors have together led to a decline in bilateral trade over the past year by almost 13% compared to 2019. Amounting to $5.6 billion. At the same time, we view in the development of investment cooperation between our countries in a positive light. According to the Bank of Russia, the volume of Swiss direct investment in Russia as of July 1st, 2020 amounted to $12.2 billion, and the volume of Russian direct investment in the Swiss economy was $16.9 billion. Swiss companies, there are more than 200 working on the Russian market, are very successful. A number of major Swiss companies like ABB, Nestle, Novartis, LafargeHolcim, and others already invested more than $10 billion in the Russian economy to build new production facilities. The heads of these companies are, by the way, also members of the Foreign Investment Advisory Council under the government of the Russian Federation. The number of jobs created in Switzerland with the participation of the Russian capital is around 40,000. The Russian subsidiary banking structures registered here, Sberbank AG, Gazprom Ltd, play an important role in ensuring investment flows. Just to conclude, wanted to say that it is obvious that Russian market still remains very attractive for the export-oriented Swiss economy. We believe that Swiss business has good prospects if it invests in creating innovative production facilities in Russia, cooperates with our companies in the fields of high tech and energy efficiency, medicine, pharmaceuticals, mechanical engineering, manufacturing, chemicals, food and waste management. In conclusion, once again, as you mentioned, Mr. Metan, the summit which took place earlier, I would like to thank the Swiss authorities, the city of Geneva, the city of peace, as His Excellency, the President of Confederation, Mr. Permanent, said, for organizing such a major key political event of this year. As we all heard the press conference of both presidents, the discussions were constructive. They were open, frank. A large number of issues was discussed. In Russia, political experts, mass media believe that it might be the first step toward the re-engagement or the resumption of our cooperation with the United States of America. Thank you very much. All the best to all of you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mr. Shulgin. So you will greet Ambassador Garmonin from our side. Okay. Yes, Mr. Lyakishev, Russian ambassador to WTO, could not join, and he apologized, but Mr. Shulgin was there. So thanks again. And now for concluding, I will give the floor to our Vice President. And just after, we will have a drink and something to eat freely in the garden. So please, Vladimir.
Monsieur le Président, vous êtes une personne modeste, mais quand même, j'aimerais vous poser une question concernant votre interview Poutine-Biden. Et ça a été publié, j'ai lu quelques mots, malheureusement, je n'ai pas pu lire tout, mais est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire où on peut le lire et dans quel journal ou dans quelle revue? Merci beaucoup.
Bon, merci Vladimir. Voilà, c'est un sujet un peu plus large que notre assemblée, mais volontiers, oui. Bon, donné quelques interviews la semaine dernière. Yves l'a fait aussi sur la RTS. On peut trouver les liens sur l'Aimant Bleu, sur Russia Today International et Russia Today France. Et puis, Mikhail Goussarov, qui est au fond, a fait une interview. Il vient de m'envoyer les coordonnées ce matin. Ce que je vous propose, c'est qu'après la conférence, on enverra à toute la liste des participants les liens pour accéder à ces différentes interviews. Toi, tu as aussi un lien, je crois, Yves, avec ce que tu as fait à géopolitique, ou je ne sais plus. Oui, sur le tweet je trouverai. Voilà. Comme ça, on pourra vous envoyer le lien pour ces différentes interventions. Oui, d'accord. Merci encore à tout le monde. Merci à nos intervenants. Et puis, je vous invite à partager le verre et à manger, voilà, à renouer avec la partie apéritive et festive de ces réunions.
Anyway, both will work. So. Yeah. Is one only on your camera? Which one is it? Is this one?
Yeah, we pass both the mics.
Exactly. Okay, I think we can start. So welcome to the audience here at the Geneva Press Club. My name is Pierre Rucci. I'm the director of the Geneva Press Club, Club Suisse de la Presse. And it's a pleasure to see you here. And I also want to welcome all those speakers and some media and public that is following us on Zoom and that will intervene directly from anywhere they are. And finally, welcome to all the people following us on our website, www.pressclub.ch, where this session is live streamed and will be set on our internet site, and you will be able to find back this session on the site. So it's a pleasure for me. I welcome our speakers here. As I said, we will have a session, as we call hybrid session, people here speaking, people on Zoom speaking from sometimes remote places. So it's often interesting to have people a little bit from everywhere and to bring them together. This way is easier and makes it pretty interesting, actually. So I thank you very much. And without taking more time for this introduction, I will give the floor to Mr. Ronald Barnes, who will moderate this panel. Thank you for coming, organizing this with us. You are at the head and the chair of the Indigenous People and the Nations Coalition from Alaska, and very active here in Geneva for many, many years. So, Mr. Barnes, I give you the word.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rossier. Thank you for the introduction. I would like to open by saying I'm from Alaska. I represent the Indigenous Peoples and Nations Coalition, which is the free political institution from Alaska and designated so by the majority of tribal governments from Alaska. I was appointed as the permanent representative from Alaska. Alaska was listed under Article 73 under General Assembly Resolution 66I in 1946. And so we were on the list at the same time that Morocco, Tunisia, Indonesia, and other non-self-governing territories were placed on the list. So when we were removed in 1959 under General Assembly Resolution 1469, the United States of America did not follow procedure. The African states, during the process of adoption, accused the European states and the United States of democratic despotism. They questioned many of the GA resolutions, saying, well, what about General Assembly Resolution 742? And what about this other resolution where we have to examine this procedure and monitor this? And so there were many questions during the adoption. And when we discovered this in 1982, the state of Alaska tabled a report called the 1982 Alaska Statute Commission Report. In this report, it stated that Alaska still has a right of independence, or we could choose a compact of free association, or we could develop some other level of relationship with the United States of America. So as we introduce this panel, it's about consultation on double standards in human rights towards cooperation and improving relations. The experts from the former subcommission made it very clear to me. There were two of them especially, and the former expert from Greece, Erica Irene Dias, and of course the late Miguel Alfonso Martinez, were very strong in asserting, as Erica would say, ambassador, you always assert your status and never, ever let any other state reduce you, or the possibility that you have the right to represent Alaska as a permanent representative. You are a UN Charter state-based ambassador. Why? The reason is because when they followed procedure in our case, we never decided anything. And when you look at what happened in Algeria or Tunisia or Morocco, when the French people voted, the General Assembly said, no, 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 that is not a province of France. The French people cannot vote. only the Tunisians in Tunisia, only the Moroccans in Morocco, and perhaps Mr. Alfred Desaias will elaborate on this point of law, why the peoples concerned under Article 73 are the ones who determine the status. Being that Alaska, the indigenous peoples of Alaska did not determine the status, we assert our right under international law in no uncertain terms that we are a state of peoples and we have sovereign equality under Article 1.2 of the Charter, the equal right and self-determination principle. So this goes back to this consultation on double standards in human rights. If the European states were accused by the African states of democratic despotism, and they went further, they said, Alaska and Hawaii is nothing but a gift to United States of America, since you're just granting this to them without following procedure as a gift, since you freed them from the Axis powers after World War II under the Hitler regime. So we assert unequivocally, and we use Indigenous Peoples and Nations Coalition. When you look at the case of Palestine, it came in as an NGO and it developed into representation as a state of peoples with a seat in the General Assembly. So one of the experts of the subcommission said unequivocally, said Alaska and Hawaii cases are so strong, they have a right, like Palestine, to have a seat in the United Nations equal to any other state, even if we sat it as an observer as we were attempting to resolve our unresolved case where we are recognized as a state of peoples under international law. So I believe for the audience throughout the United States, in Europe and Canada, Alaska, Hawaii, and elsewhere, I'm going to read the first paragraph to give you an idea the importance of what we're trying to do here today. And that is to address double standards in addressing human rights here at the Human Rights Council, and also reports that are sent to the General Assembly, the reports that we give and to the special procedures, advising them so that they can properly record our testimony, give conclusions and give recommendations so that our peoples can get a recommendation to address the violation of our human rights. So in an ideal world, human rights and international law would be applied uniformly. States would understand human rights as a holistic system of law. Civil society and non-governmental community would have more space. The politicization of human rights with the double standards would exist in the work of the Human Rights Council and in other UN bodies. This allows for states to enjoy virtual impunity for multiple crimes in ongoing exploitation of peoples and territories, revealing a credibility gap. We have witnessed a well-orchestrated naming and shaming of countries by the South, by the North, and the former colonial and occupying powers. The legacy of colonialism and the adverse impacts on the economies and infrastructures of developing countries are perpetuated by puppet machineries that remain in place to serve the economic and political interests of the former masters. So how can we contribute to the recognition of our common human dignity as the source of all human rights, which should be promoted and protected equally without discrimination or privilege? And we introduce this because we would like to make things better, not only for Alaska, for other peoples, for peoples who are coming here from various parts of the world who would like to have their violation of their human rights recognized, those who suffer from extrajudicial killings, who are in other parts of the world, the migrants. We want not only Western states to promote and protect human rights, we want all states. And it should not be that Western states go after undeveloped states or the poorer states. They should go after also the states that are committing these serious human rights violations, going into other countries, taking their resources, their oil, placing puppet regimes, etc. So with that, I'm going to read the second and the third paragraph of the introduction in between speakers so that I give the chance for our distinguished Professor Alfred de Zayas to open up on his topic. Of course, Professor de Zayas, I've known him for many years. He's not only a good friend, but he is a current professor of international law at the Geneva School of Diplomacy. And I could see some of his students in here attending. And he's retired from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And Professor de Zayas has served as the first UN independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order from 2012 to 2018. Of course, you can only serve for 6 years. Although retired, he continues to lecture and to promote human rights for everyone. So I present to you Professor Alfred de Zayas.
Thank you, Ronald. Friends, colleagues, I see many faces that I recognize in the room. And what I'm going to say is nothing extraordinary. It's something that basically everyone has thought about. And it's the issue of the credibility, the authority of the United Nations, of the Human Rights Council, of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, etc. That really stands and falls on objectivity, on rigorous application of that principle, both of general law and of history research, audiatur et altera pars, meaning you have to listen to all sides. You have to study all views before you make a judgment. And in today's world, our problem, or one of the many problems we face, is access to information and how, through algorithms and otherwise, the information that reaches the citizen is very frequently filtered, is skewed. And that I can say from my own experience, doing research, I have found that even United Nations documents that are in the internet, that should be easily accessible, if they are problematic, you won't find them. I mean, there is, just to name one example, Navi Pillay was the High Commissioner for Human Rights back in 2012. She did a fantastic report on unilateral coercive measures. Try to find it. It's AHRC 19 bar 33, but I'm sure that there are algorithms that are blocking access to that document, as there are to the ECWAS report by Professor Richard Falk and Virginia Tilley on the impact of sanctions in Syria. These things are abnormal, but you cannot function unless you have solid information. And more we see evidence-free allegations being picked up by the New York Times, by the Washington Post, by CNN, and everybody just repeating it so often that the fake news as it becomes plausible. And fake news, of course, generates fake history and fake law. just by politicians who want something to be legal. They simply postulate it. They make a reference to some resolution of the General Assembly, and suddenly it is supposed to be hard law, supposed to be binding. Well, that's not the case, but with the complicity of the mainstream media, they get away with it. Now, Ron just mentioned Resolution 1469. That's a resolution that freed the United States from reporting under Chapter 11 of the United Nations Charter, reporting on the advancement toward self-determination of Alaska and Hawaii. Of course, the referenda held in 1958 were just fraudulent, because the only people who had a right to participate in the self-determination referendum were, of course, the natives, not the American army stationed in Alaska or in Hawaii, and they all voted. Matter of fact, they were persuaded to vote, they were paid to vote, whereas the indigenous were intimidated in not voting. And many of them were disqualified because they didn't speak perfect English. So the whole thing is fundamentally flawed. And of course, it can be challenged. You will remember the infamous Zionism is racism resolution of 1970 that was done away with by the General Assembly by another resolution in 1991. So it is entirely possible to revisit a resolution of the General Assembly and to change it. But now let's get to certain examples of double standards. In my 41 years of working in the United Nations in various capacities, I was hired by the great Theo van Boven, with whom, by the way, I still have quite a bit of contact. Theo van Boven, professor at the University of Maastricht. He was the director of the then Division of Human Rights. He hired me in 1980. And that was a time when we really were a very small office, and people were excited about what we were doing. I mean, we were convinced that we were going to make a difference. And at that time, you didn't have the politicization of human rights or the weaponization of human rights as you have today. And I've seen it over the last 40 years getting increasingly political, increasingly one-sided, and the selectivity of the Commission on Human Rights, of the Human Rights Council, of the UPR, et cetera, is shocking. And of course, it goes at the expense of the authority and credibility of the entire system. Now, one example, whereas, you know, countries get condemned all the time, naming and shaming. There are resolutions adopted against Venezuela every other day, et cetera, or against Belarus. Now, take the Commission on Human Rights back in 2003. Everybody knows the horrors of Guantanamo. Everybody knows that torture was systematically practiced in Guantanamo. People were subjected to arbitrary detention. The Working Group on Arbitrary Detention made several findings on that. Well, when it came to the Commission on Human Rights, the predecessor of the Human Rights Council, the Europeans actually succeeded in blocking the resolution by adopting an earlier resolution, what you call a no action resolution. So you actually decide not to vote on the resolution. So they killed it in 2003. When it came in 2004, they killed it again. So you see how really irresponsible the Commission on Human Rights could be. And if you think that the Human Rights Council is any better, well, my personal experience as an independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order is that there are independent experts and there are independent experts. That is, there are some experts like Niels Meltzer, who just published a fantastic book on Julian Assange. At present only exists in German. The original version, Der Fall Julian Assange, published by Pieper in Munich, one of the biggest publishers in Germany. I'm very, very happy that Pieper took it because the book is really breathtaking. It's, you talk about the Dreyfus affair and you talk about Émile Zola and you talk about J'accuse. What Niels Meltzer is showing us is many, many times worse than what happened to Alfred Dreyfus in 1898. And thank God there was an Émile Zola, and thank God there is a Niels Meltzer. But what Niels Meltzer shows is the corruption, the undermining of the rule of law, not only in the United States, but in the United States, United Kingdom, Sweden, Ecuador, the collusion of these states in what is termed lawfare to destroy Julian Assange. And the same countries that are destroying Julian Assange, his detention or his situation was declared to be arbitrary detention under Article 9 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That was the judgment of the working group on arbitrary detention back in 2015 in December. And then in January 2016, I issued a press release telling the UK and Sweden, for heaven's sake, I mean, you're always pointing fingers at others. You know, when the United Nations body finds that you have violated human rights, I mean, give the good example to the world and release this man. Of course, at the time, David Cameron called it ridiculous. This demand, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the arrogance is really breathtaking. And it's not only the arrogance, it's the rank hypocrisy that I observed over the last 41 years. Now, Ben Emerson, the special rapporteur on human rights while combating terrorism, he issued a report in 2013, which outlined the horrors of the policy of extraordinary rendition. These were the kidnappings of individuals who, without any due process, without anything, were just simply handed over to the CIA for purpose of torture. They were sent to secret camps. They were sent, sometimes kept in ships, so that they, you know, could have no access to press or no access to lawyers, no access to anybody. In any event, they disappeared there for a while. I remember one of the victims of this extraordinary rendition was Maher Arar, a Syrian who was living in Montreal. And at that time, when I was professor, I had taken early retirement from the UN, and I was the Douglas Mackay Brown Chair in International Law at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And it was so horrendous that I organized the faculty to demand the Parliament in Ottawa to investigate Canada's involvement, because of course Canada gave the name to the CIA. That's how come the CIA could get them. And how did Canada, you know, get the name? Because he happened to have been at a party where there were many other Muslims. And well, fine. The same thing happened in the Sayadi case, Belgium, a case we had before the Human Rights Committee when I was still with the Human Rights Committee. And that was a very interesting case because this individual, Sayadi, he had his bank accounts frozen, and he had his passport confiscated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He was ruined as a businessman. And he said, but how did I land on this sanctions list? Belgium came to us and said, oh, no. I mean, Human Rights Committee has no jurisdiction, because, I mean, we are just following the Security Council, except that we had very good people in the Human Rights Committee at the time, including Yuji Iwasawa, who is now the Japanese judge in the International Court of Justice, and the late good friend of mine, Sir Nigel Rodley. And they both essentially argued, look, you know, the Human Rights Committee very much has jurisdiction because you made a mistake. You put them on the list. So it's not that you're following the sanctions of the Security Council. I mean, you put them in the list, and that was reckless endangerment for this individual and his family. And as a matter of fact, we even invoked Article 24 of the UN Charter. I always say the UN Charter is the world constitution. And Article 25 says, of course, that decisions of the Security Council are binding. But Article 25 follows Article 24. And Article 24 sets out the terms of reference of the Security Council. The Security Council is not above the law. The Security Council cannot act in a manner inconsistent with the object and purpose of the UN Charter, inconsistent with the purposes and principles of the organization. So it was really extraordinary that we could, in the Human Rights Committee, invoke Article 24. So there is flexibility, and that's why I'm saying 1469 will fall. We will make sure that 1469 is removed. Now, I'll give you a couple more examples. Now, yes.
One more example.
Go to the next. No, afterwards, I can talk for hours, as my students know. I don't even give them a pause in class. I just keep talking. As the case may be, everybody's talking about this poor fellow, the blogger Roman Protasevich, now the Belarusian blogger. Well, of course, it's massive violation of international law to claim that there's a bomb in a plane and have the plane land in Minsk just to be able to arrest this blogger. Certainly a major violation of international law. But again, you have to put things into context. What the Europeans did in 2013 with Evo Morales, the head of state, the president of Bolivia, to force his plane down in Vienna because they wanted to search the plane with full sovereign immunity. I mean, it's amazing that they would do that. They searched the plane, and of course, Edward Snowden was not in. But everybody just forgets what happened, and that's not. There were several other cases also involving Ukraine. The Ukraine, for instance, had a plane that was going to Minsk, to Belarus, had to come back. That was 2 or 3 years ago. And do you think that the New York Times, the Washington Post were upset about the fact that they basically hijacked the plane and had it land in Kiev in order to arrest a political opponent? No, no. So here is classical double standards. And the last one is, of course, Navalny. It's amazing what unisono you get from the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, and of course, Germany, Deutsche Welle, Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung, concerning Navalny. Of course, we all want to see Navalny liberated. Of course, we're against his arrest. But what has happened to Assange is 1,000 times worse than what has happened to Navalny, and the world tolerates it. The Human Rights Council tolerates it. So if you apply international law a la carte, you are actually undermining yourself. You're undermining your authority, and you're giving the bad example. Because if the big boys commit gross violations of human rights, you know, what can you expect of the little ones? What can you expect of countries in Asia or Africa, etc.? There is a saying in Latin, quod licet Jovi non licet bovi, which means that which is allowed to the god Jupiter is certainly not allowed to the bovi, to the bovines, to the bulls. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alfred. Of course, you always give a lively speech, and you mentioned that there are other cases where either the former Commission on Human Rights or there were other incidents where other states engaged in activity that was clearly a violation of international law, but nobody said anything. And it goes, as you would say, the plane lands and is taken down with the president of a foreign country. And each country is supposed to have sovereign equality. So where is the sovereign equality and who has the power? So power does say something in today's world. And the media, yes. And the media is also complicit in this, because when you look at the Western media or the so-called state media of the communists, and they always used to have tit for tats. When you look at the nitty-gritty, it's not much different. There are violations on both sides. So let me go on. I will start with Alice Abu. She will give you her traditional name. She's a 7-year residential school survivor from Sekwem Pemkul of the region of Kamloops, the unceded territory in the interior of the so-called British Columbia, Canada. Ms. Abu is KE70 academic, a land defender, a water protector, dedicating the majority of her life, she's not afraid to say she's 68 years old, to the sacred inherent rights of our lands, waters for the next 7 generations. She works extensively for the betterment of our indigenous peoples and is a lifetime advocate for human rights and looks forward to continuing this important work. Now, just to give you a briefing, what happened recently was the discovery of over 200 children's bodies at a residential school that they unearthed. And so this residential school system, there are many places where many children died, but I will let Madam Abu give you her account. Thank you.
You're uploading the video? Wait up. In Jetua is het schwakken. Doch nog een. De galmoogse squast. Iganawaki. Alice Abbey is my colonial name. I am from the Sisquapan-Uluk. I attended the Sugarcane Indian Day School for 2 years. I'm a survivor of St. Joseph's Mission Indian Residential School, established in 1867. One day when my father came over to my mom's house, I was 9 years old. He asked my mom how come I wasn't in school, and that the Indian agent, Mr. Christie, told him that if I didn't go to school, white people would take me and she wouldn't see me anymore. Not go to school at the Indian Residential School. So my dad took me over to St. Joseph's Mission. It was a really big white building. The nuns came and took me upstairs to the 3rd floor. They took all my clothes off, took me to the washroom, the bathroom, and then they cut my hair and they put DDT in my head. And then they took me over to the big room where there's lots of showers, and they washed me. Then they brought me over to my bed and told me that this was my bed, that my number was 45. There was no names. My number was 45. They gave me their clothes and their shoes. If I disobeyed, there was punishment and there was hell. at nights for the longest time, I was really afraid. I was really scared. There was just so much fear instilled in me that at night I would crawl under all of those beds to my sister's bed. She was a junior then. And I would ask her to please don't sleep before me, and I'd fall asleep with her. In the morning, Sister Juliet would come and she'd have her cowbell and her whistle or her stick, and she would just put on all the lights, and we'd hear all of this noise, and she'd come over to my sister's bed and she'd start hitting my sister, and she'd hit her with the cowbell sometimes because I wasn't allowed to be in her bed. From being hit so many times and my hair pulled, my right ear, it started to leak. There was some liquid coming out of my ear, and Sister Joseph took me up to the sewing room, and she put my head sideways with my hair, and she took this bottle and she's pouring it in my ear, and it was really cold. And it was pure rubbing alcohol. I could taste it, and it just burned. And I just grabbed my head and I just screamed and stomped my feet. And I'd really start trying to get the alcohol out of my ear. And she would be slapping me and pulling my hair. And I'd get up to go out, and one time, there was many times, one time I turned around and I looked and there was another girl. She came in after me and she sat down, and Sister Joseph pulled her head over and started pouring that. And I was watching her and she did the same thing. She was just really pushing her on her ear and screaming. And I was watching because I was thinking maybe it wasn't supposed to hurt. Maybe it was me. Maybe it wasn't supposed to hurt anybody. And in grade 6, Miss Beaujemay, she went over and she really sharpened her pencils, really sharp, and she walked over to where I was sitting and she just stabbed me right here. And she broke her pencil, and she kept telling me, write, and told me that I was being punished. And I still have that lead in my shoulder today. I lost hearing in my right ear, and when they operated, they cut it and they tried to fix it, and I was gone away in this Indian hospital in Sardis, called Sardis, and my mom didn't know where I was. I was gone for a whole year, and when I came back, that's what Miss Beaujemay did to me. And then I went to be a senior, and Sister Anne Rosario just seemed like she was strapping me all the time. Like she would strap me with all the girls with a really long leather strap that you sharpened shaving blades for shaving, men's shaving. And she would come up over her head, and then she would come down on our arms, and we had to kneel in front of her with both of our arms out. And sometimes my hands and my arms would be swollen and aching, and I'd try to go in the bathroom and soak them in a sink with cold water. But she'd come behind me and she'd hit my head on the sink and tell me, get out. Sister Juliet, when I was a little girl, she was in juniors, and one time I was saying, tlak, tlak, in Indian in my loan language, and we're trying to say, coming, coming. She came over and she told me to stick my tongue out, and pulled my head back, and I stuck my tongue out, and she came an upper punch under my chin, and I really bit my tongue, and she said, that's a devil's language. You don't use out language. You're going to go to hell. You have to obey. And then I was eyewitness to sexual abuse. There was this garage that wasn't very far from the building, and I heard some noise in there, so I snuck over there, and I was peeking in there, and the priest was in there with a girl, and he had his private parts in her mouth, and he had her hair pulled down, and she was kneeling in front of him. And the same girl used to pee her bed all the time, and the nuns would tie her hands and her feet to her bed and ridicule her and have the other girls laugh at her. And she ended up with a really bad arm, like they used a needle on her when they'd give us needles. They used the same needle on her, and she ended up with this really big sore on her arm, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger, and you could see the bone. And she used to walk around, and you could smell it. And she's the girl that used to pee the bed all the time, and she had a nervous breakdown. And right to today, she is very afraid to get the COVID vaccine. There were some girls that tried to run away, but they were made examples of. They were really brutalized. They got their heads shaved bald, and they were beaten. And we had these lockers with our numbers on it, and they were rectangular lockers. And those girls used to try to crawl in there, like they tried to squeeze in there and hide, because they really were being brutalized and ridiculed. There were no doctors, there were no nurses for any kind of anything like illness or anything over there. There was no nutrition. Our food was, at times it smelled like the porridge was rotten, like they had rotten meat in there. There was meat in our porridge, and they used to have prunes, those rotten prunes in our porridge. But if we didn't eat it, they would give it to us for lunch. This was every day for 7 years and much, much more. This is just the tip of the iceberg. The Canadian state statutory laws and Christianity, they forcibly removed children from their families and their communities. Again, these this testimony from myself and a survivor of residential school or prison. This is only minimal of what my people have experienced and were subjected to in these prisons. There were numbers, no names. The Canadian state perpetuates its image to the world that they are a leader in human rights, a leader in reconciliation. They want global security and prosperity, a more just, inclusive, and sustainable world. Indigenous grassroots people know this is false and their lies. The Canadian state and its jurisprudence subscribes to the doctrine of discovery, the people bull, the domination and the dehumanization of Indigenous peoples and children. I realize and I know that there are brave and strong rapporteurs that report and make recommendations based on fact. We give you inner strength, to do what you see is right, based on what you see, based on determination, assimilation, and genocide of Indigenous people, based on fact. Indigenous peoples, citizens, and intergenerational survivors of these Indian residential school prisons to call on Canada to take action and repeal and revoke the doctrine of discovery, the Papal Bulls of 1452. I encourage the United Nations to act with genuine results. This intergenerational genocide we are still suffering with nowhere else to go for help. The United Nations can request a Canadian state delegation of Indian residential school prisons survivors of torture, degradation, termination, genocide to testify before the United Nations Human Rights Tribunal.
I would like to thank you very much for your statement. It is a very riveting statement, of course. When Alaska in 1955, this is an important part of the presentation that she is giving, because in 1955, Teton v. United States of America, Alfred de Zayas, during the last days of his term as an independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order, he did a memo. And in this memo, I'll read you the paragraph, and I'll show you how this ties to the Canadian Indigenous peoples, to all the Indigenous peoples of North America. And here's the paragraph from this memo. The United States Supreme Court instituted doctrines of superiority and racial discrimination in law and policy by the Teton v. United States of America, 348 U.S. 272, 1955, making it clear in footnote 18, and here's the quote: "This purpose and acquisition and its effect on land held by the natives," in parentheses, "of the Philippines," because this was quoting a Philippine case, "was distinguished from the settlement of the white race in the United States, where the dominant purpose of the whites in America was to occupy the land," unquote. Further, the Teton judgment relies on the precedent of the Johnson v. McIntosh 21 8 week 543 1823 case, which held that the character and religion of the native inhabitants of America justified, and here's a quote from the case, "considering them as a people over whom the superior genius of Europe might claim an ascendancy," unquote. The denial of the right of self-determination on grounds of racial discrimination and the application of doctrines of superiority constitutes a crime against humanity tantamount to a form of apartheid. Why is this important to Canada also? Because the 1888 St. Catherine Mills v. the Queen case used the precedent of the 1823 Johnson v. McIntosh case to say that even the Indigenous peoples of Canada had to adhere to the ascendancy of the European civilization. They were better than us. Therefore, they could do what they want with us. One thing that she said in her talk was that this was done based on statutory law, the 1951 Indian Claims Act. The Catholic and other church schools worked in concert with the state, and the mounted police went and took these children and brought them to the school. This was the intent to destroy in whole or in part a racial, linguistic, etc., as it's stated in the Genocide Convention. So what we're looking at is a very serious charge of genocide against the Indigenous peoples, children of Canada, who are defenseless. And there's much more to this, but I'll let Alfred say something. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, as she said. And the Indian Claims Commission or any residential school commission should not serve, because when they were doing this residential school commission in the newspapers, it was very clear. The church, the state were concealing documents, destroying documents. If there's a genocide case against others, why cannot it be the same when it's against Indigenous peoples? And I like to quote Ward Churchill from his book, Indians Are Us, because Robert Jackson, who was a chief prosecutor in the Nuremberg tribunals for the United States and for the states that defeated the Axis powers, said this before they executed Julius Streicher: if we don't live up to the same standard, then we just murdered Julius Streicher. So we can see there's a double standard here again. And what could we do about it? I'll give you the floor, then we need to move on.
Sure. Very quickly, just to no, very quickly, referring to this book, which I recently reviewed. It is a doctoral dissertation by Tamara Starr-Blanket, also an indigenous from Canada. The title is Suffer the Little Children, Genocide, Indigenous Nations, and the Canadian State. So this is a dissertation in law. So she actually goes in detail into the criteria of the Genocide Convention of 1948 and how that reflects on the experience of the indigenous of Canada and of the indigenous of the United States. In Canada, there is now a movement called Idle No More. And I was thinking that it is time that in the United States, there be a movement, Indigenous Lives Matter. Because what most people don't know, and it is not in many history books, although all the data is available, there used to be 10 million indigenous in North America, in the territory which is now United States and Canada. At the end of the 19th century, there were barely 190,000. And back in 1970, I hitchhiked from New York to California and back. And the one thing that struck me then is that there were literally tens of thousands of names of villages and towns and cities and rivers and lakes and mountains. And they all had indigenous names. And you asked yourself, what happened to all of these people? Well, there was Wounded Knee, there was Sandy Creek, and there are countless others.
Okay, thank you, Alfred. We'll move on to the next speaker. And the next speaker is John N. Shipton. Shipton, he is the father of and defender of Julian Assange, and he will appear in a video. And I asked him to give me his biography, and he just said simple. I have 2 words. I'm building industry. That's what he did during his lifetime. So, but to give you just a little bit more, he spends his time now traveling Australia, the United States of America, and other places. And he does come to Europe to talk too, as a defender, talking about how in the Assange case, there's underlying danger and concerns of freedom of expression and freedom of press in today's world. But we just start now the video of John Shipton.
Dear friends, Julian Assange, journalist, publisher, moves towards the 12th year of arbitrary detention and jail, innocent of crime and extradition refused in Belmarsh maximum security prison. The mid-20th century great civil artifacts, the United Nations, the Conventions of Asylum, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Council of Europe, and embrace in national legislation of human rights, all move towards ruin. What rough beast slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? The singular icon example of state despair and cynicism is Julian Assange's persecution, characterized accurately as a deluge of malice over a period now 12 years. The conventions of asylum trampled, declaration by United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention derided, due process trashed, malfeasance and misfeasance documented, entered into by the United Kingdom Prosecuting Service and the Swedish Prosecuting Authority. Professor of Law at Glasgow University and United Nations Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer's exacting review revealing Julian a victim of deliberate psychological torture over these years, characterized as, before our eyes, slow motion murder. Nation states' despair, misuse and cynicism towards the 20th century's attainments, magnificent civil artifacts bound within the United Nations, has led to 20 years replete with a ceaseless barbarity. Our noble task, my noble task, to free Julian Assange and acknowledge and recreate the prestige and deliberations of a truly magnificent civil structure, the United Nations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Shipton, for your contribution. It's very important, and we laud you for your efforts to bring light to one of the most famous whistleblowers and the one who brings to the forefront the challenges we face today of freedom of expression, freedom of the press. And to ensure that we are finished on time, I'm going to go straight to Dr. Vicky Casanova-Willis, PhD. She is the co-executive director of the U.S. Human Rights Network, a national network of over 300 organizations plus individuals working to strengthen a human rights movement and culture within the United States. She has worked with the West Side Justice Center Board and is past president of National Conference of Black Lawyers. And Dr. Casanova-Willis is an educator and administrator and is a founding member of other organizations. She's testified at national and international forums, co-authoring several UPR, CERD, CAT stakeholder reports, and co-hosted the working group of experts on people of African descent. She also works with the International Human Rights Association of American Minorities and continues to promote human rights for peoples in the United States of America. So I present to you Dr. Casanova-Willis.
Greetings, peace and blessings. I look forward to the video stream. What about the people, the other side of the human rights equation? Greetings, I'm Dr. Vicky Casanova-Willis, co-executive director of the U.S. Human Rights Network. Paying homage to the ancestors, those who came before us, and on whose shoulders we stand, urging unity for the generations living today in the current struggle for truth and justice, and thinking of future generations yet unborn to whom we owe our best efforts to leave a legacy that will redeem and repair all that we can, that they might inherit a planet and a future that are better because we make the promise of human rights for all peoples a reality while there was still time. The U.S. Human Rights Network is a national network of 300 plus organizations and thousands of individuals since our founding in 2003, working to strengthen a human rights movement and culture within the United States, led by the people most directly impacted by human rights violations. We work to secure dignity and justice for all on a continent built on stolen land, by stolen lives and labor of those who to this day are not treated as full humans. We have learned firsthand that the promise of human rights is aspirational yet achievable. The challenges, however, are daunting and with multiple elephants in the room. The myth of white supremacy and the corrupting influence of unchecked greed have an apparent stranglehold on sanity for the powerful, moneyed, and even those in positions of influence whose hearts may be in the right place at times. What do the people on the ground have to say about living in a global and domestic society that uplifts the language of human rights, but is struggling to walk the talk? The denial of justice for people of color and others at the margins is deeply entrenched and seemingly insurmountable, even at times in the UN system. And as US civil society shared with the Biden-Harris administration last week, without a national human rights plan and infrastructure, and our federal, state, and local governments ensuring accountability, efforts remain symbolic at best. 2020 took the blatant disregard for life to a new low and looked us straight in the eye while we watched modern day lynching play out in real time for the world to see. Still, far too many are immune to state violence against Black people, and we contrast the response to events of January 6th. Double standard indeed. So the time has passed for further analysis. It is action and accountability time now. We seek transparent, early, and equitable participation of civil society in matters affecting people's lives, livelihood, dignity, and very existence. We need a human rights framework with integrity because civil rights is not enough. In a country whose civil code still authorizes legal slavery in the prison system today, human rights is clearly not on the agenda. Where is the justice in a criminal punishment system that incarcerates more people than any other nation on the planet? And it's well known that the masses incarcerated in cages for most of their lives are overwhelmingly African descended, followed by Latinx and indigenous peoples. Where is the moral authority for a nation that has ripped families apart for more than 400 years and continues to this day, separating parents and babies at its southern borders and in its airports from melanin-banned countries and on city streets and neighborhoods daily across this nation, filling the jails and detention centers legally, civil law? And what about the children? In my country, the only one to still resist ratifying the Convention on the Rights of the Child, one must assume the honest answer is, who cares? The global community can and must do better with regard to human rights accountability, even when there are just decisions made, either in the US court system or through strong recommendations from the UN. Implementation has not been a priority. It's been a challenge. The American exceptionalism, which could manifest in pride and a commitment to uphold the highest standards of our Constitution and the treaties we have ratified, instead allows a blatant disregard for human rights remedies. This continues because those who benefit from the power imbalance have no regard for the grave cost we all pay, ultimately, for denying the very humanity of other living beings. Human rights cannot mean perfecting the form while neglecting any substance. What about the people? The UN Human Rights Council, or HRC, is the international intergovernmental body for promoting and protecting human rights worldwide. 1 year ago, in response to demands from families and allies of those murdered in cold blood by state violence, amid the US Black Lives Matter movement that lit a spark around the world, the HRC convened an urgent debate to address current racially inspired human rights violations. They said systemic racism, police violence, and violence against peaceful protests. Historic and significant, but it was a compromise. The late George Floyd's brother, Philanese, and hundreds of other directly impacted families and ally organizations we helped anchor had urged the council to establish an independent international commission of inquiry focused on the ongoing human rights violations by law enforcement in the US. Instead, they adopted a watered down resolution due to diplomatic pressure from the United States government. Thus, despite achieving an unprecedented acknowledgement of systemic anti-Black racism and a new potential for greater accountability, it was nevertheless a compromise. HRC Resolution 43/1 mandates the High Commissioner to prepare a report on human rights violations against Africans and people of African descent by law enforcement globally and on the government's responses to related protests. A first, but the jury is still out. The people await the High Commissioner's report due this month. Then what? Time will tell. Ultimately, justice can only be achieved with collaboration from the international human rights community. It will require a shift by those in positions of power and privilege. We, the network, stand with our allies and members of all ages, races, abilities, genders, and access because we understand that our destinies are intricately intertwined and that we must not lose this chance to courageously challenge the status quo. As we look toward overcoming the lasting legacy of chattel slavery that funded this very system of oppression that we seek to dismantle, the decade is winding down and much remains to be done. One urgent task is human rights education, which will be crucial to shift the paradigm. When the mass media and school curricula elevate one culture at the expense of all others, that false narrative becomes the reality and strengthens systemic and structural racism. Denying people of color the right to culture and educational content that earns their humanity is criminal. And it reinforces a false deficit-based stereotype, dehumanization. Per the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26 and the SDGs, number 4, we have a human right to education, fully inclusive, respectful curriculum, educators who value all peoples and cultures, equity and resources and access, and it must include human rights to be a quality education. Social media exposes the lethal effects of propaganda and miseducation, fueling a climate where endless war is acceptable and Black lives from the US to Brazil to Colombia do not matter. This double standard must end, and it will take all of us. Human rights defenders and enforcers must unite as a principled coalition against oppression. Speaking out must not be allowed to generate backlash and brutalization based on differences which are only skin deep. The targeting of current activists and journalists echoes the COINTELPRO political prisoners' plight, dying after decades in prison, elderly and infirm. Those were the Black Lives Matter youth of their 60s civil rights era. We must face facts. White privilege and the myth of white supremacy wield a powerful and destructive influence too often. The human rights movement must be decolonized, or the UN will fall far short of its full potential. To continue accepting anything less is hypocritical, deeply, for all of us. The way forward will require courage, truth, justice, reparation, and transformation. The U.S. Human Rights Network urges unity to hasten towards full cooperation and embrace of a new paradigm, a process of finally walking the talk of human rights. The world and all its precious peoples truly cannot wait any longer. Asante Sana.
Hi, and thank you for inviting.
So that is a very good discussion that you just gave, mentioning human rights defenders. And it brought to mind justice can be achieved only when there's the desire to pursue it. And collectively as peoples, as civil society, as states, as nations and peoples, we have to remind ourselves that there's many good people in every country, and I've seen this. There's lots of good people in Europe, in the United States, in Africa, in the Eastern countries, Russia, and you meet very good peoples from all over the world. But it's us who must pursue this. States have the responsibility to uphold it, but we must push these states. Sometimes we work against NGOs who are put or installed by the Secret Service of particular countries. And sometimes we have NGOs who deliberately work against us because, and I face them, I've been threatened by them. They're good church-going NGOs who give you death threats. I received one in the Palliative Nations. So when we talk about NGOs, we have those of us who are trying to pursue, to promote, protect, to call on everyone to abide by human rights. So with that, I'm gonna go right to our next speaker, my good friend and brother, Barrister Majid Trambu, who will be speaking from London. He is a renowned human rights and humanitarian lawyer of more than 40 years experience. His distinguished legal career began in 1983 at his birthplace in Kashmir. As a recognized and leading expert in public law, he is committed to work for fundamental freedoms, providing assistance to people within the EU and the UN framework. He's defended people in the WHO, in WIPO, employees, etc. He is founder of a law firm in England and Wales known as MTUK Solicitors, and a director of International Human Rights Association of American Minorities, which is co-sponsoring this event. So I present to you my friend, my brother, and he's the permanent representative of IRAM for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Barnes. Greetings to all of you who are listening to me. And I see many of my associates on the panel. I particularly would, of course, remember our great friend of humanity, Professor Alfred de Zayas. I hope he is hearing me. And of course, Marianne Mills, I'm seeing. It's very nice to see her. I did say Leon earlier on, and Professor Ronca is there. Joseph Ronca is there as well. Very, very great to see all of you. And of course, there were very much formidable presentations on the double standards in human rights. And that's where I will stick to be quite honest. In my view, moving the human rights agenda forward during this century to the next century requires promotion of social and economic environment, which I do not see at the moment, to be quite honest. And then if we promote social and economic environment, that will be conducive to respect for human dignity. And that is what we are lacking at the moment. Indeed, as we see, we are living in a complex world. And particularly now, COVID-19 has made it much more difficult, where human rights, social justice, and economic betterment are politicized. And I would even go to the extent to say is weaponized. Without any question, decisions are made and enforced depending on the political will of the states, parties of the United Nations. And undoubtedly, there are double standards on human rights. The countries of the West and their allies across the globe continue to create an inherent imbalance in the promotion and protection of human rights. But it's not limited only to the West. I must say it is it's applicable to all the 5 continents of the world. But it is very much evident in my view that what I have seen over the last 4 decades, that human rights are determined at WTO, World Trade Organization. And that leads corporates, military, and renegades, activities of some of the world's powerful countries to violate the territorial integrity, the right to development, and above all, right to self-determination. World peace and development is the key for the progression of human race my very dear friend, Alfred Desais, in his report to the General Assembly, numbered A/68/284, which he presented on 7th August 2013 to the General Assembly, at a very famous paragraph 69N, eloquently stated, and I will quote Alfred here: the General Assembly may reconsider revisiting the reality of self-determination in today's world and refer to the Special Committee on Decolonization or other United Nations instances, communications by indigenous or unrepresented peoples wherever they reside, inter alia, in Alaska, Australia, Canada, Chile, China, the Dakotas, French Polynesia, Hawaii, Kashmir, the Middle East, New Caledonia, etc., etc. All these countries and peoples who are unrepresented and nations who are not recognized, he referred to, if you want really the world peace. That is a factual situation, to be quite honest. If you want human rights to be across the board and across the world, then you got to recognize the significance and importance of self-determination. Now, in my view, there are 3 suggestions which I propose in the direction of human dignity to combat double standards in human rights. First, and I would again say this is something very crucial, reforming of the United Nations, I believe, is very crucial all round. The need for voting reform in the General Assembly, the possibility of weight voting system, increasing membership of the Security Council on regional basis, and eliminating the veto power. Again, our great friend, in his report, which I quoted just now, vetoing privilege, what he says is, Alfred Desais, Professor Alfred Desais, an obvious obstacle to a democratic and equitable order in the use and abuse of the veto privilege in the Security Council. To any neutral observer, the